Good afternoon. So we are, I think, all set to go, and I see around 90 plus people have already joined that. Welcome to IPC Masterclass Season 4. And as you know, many of you I see here are coming for the first time, while many of you have attended all three series of the last year IPC Masterclass. And with the encouraging and very enthusiastic response which we got it, we thought to launch the fourth edition, and this is the fourth edition of this IPC Masterclass. I will take a 2 minute time to brief you about the agenda, how we will go ahead today. After my initial briefing, I will request President of Infection Control Academy of India, Dr. Ranga Reddy, to introduce the topic and the speaker. And after that, we start the speakers, who is none other than Professor GVS Murthy, Vice President, Public Health Foundation of India, and Director for Indian Institute of Public Health in Hyderabad. After his formal presentation slides, we'll open up for question answer. You can ask the questions in the chat box, as well as many of you have signed up for the question answer for Telegram app. You can send the question in the Telegram app also. We'll pick up the important, relevant questions at the right time and give it to a speaker to respond to you. At the end, we'll have sponsors, AV. The most important thing here is that this session is being recorded and will be put on YouTube channel and other digital media. Continuing your participation in this event is an acceptance of this term, that this is getting recorded and will be placed in the YouTube. Some housekeeping rules, because this is a software, you know, that publicly used by many people, give access of video and audio to everybody. To keep a kind of decency as well as avoid noise in the system, I request all of you, except the speakers and the panel, to mute your video, please, and keep your microphone off throughout the session. When we start question answer, you send your question in Telegram and chat box in advance. When we start the session for question answer, we'll call your name, and only the person whose name has been announced should open up his or her voice, I mean microphone, as well as video, and then you can directly ask your questions to the speaker. Some questions we will take up directly from the Telegram and other app to ask to speaker to respond. About the certificate, we get a lot of queries, so I thought to mention in the beginning itself, there will be a certificate only for one entire series, no separate certificate for each session. So after the 4 series of the lecture, when we start, before we start the 5th discussion, panel discussion, we'll release a question set as a quiz. So you need to respond that question quiz and score more than 60% marks. Then only you will be entitled to claim your certificates, which is the digital PDF certificate. So you know about the speakers panel and the panel for chairing the session. Here I request Professor Ranga Reddy, the President of Infection Control Academy of India, as well as he's a visiting honorary professor for University of Hyderabad, to introduce the topic and introduce the speaker of the day, please.
Thank you, Pranavji. Thank you for giving that much needed impetus for the program. Ladies and gentlemen, friends who are joining us today from all over the world, a very good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are joining us from. Just before we take a little dive into the current series, let me actually put in perspective what has happened so far, and also where we plan to head with this series, and what are the objectives we would like to get out of this particular series, right? So one thing is for sure, Scott Sagan has written in his book, The Limits of Safety. Things that have never happened before happen all the time. I think that's very relevant, and I think that's the only truth which is happening to our lives, which is happening to our world currently. The global COVID-19 pandemic has presented challenges to every field, either that is healthcare, politics, economy, public health systems. In every possible sphere, I think during last 1.5 years, we got impacted. There was probably no distinction between a developed or developing country in terms of the challenges which we were presented with. However, the developing countries like ours, like India, we were probably less well placed to cope with the adverse effects which were emanating from this COVID-19 disease or pandemic. In particular, there were very important advances which were made towards sustainable development during probably last 4 decades. And this COVID-19 probably is going to reverse all of them in a negative sense of it, right? So tackling the pandemic and its effects, therefore, requires better understanding of ground reality. The experts, who have the prerequisite knowledge leading the strategy formulation and also the implementation of it. A closer cooperation, not only at a given geography or a given country, but at a wider thing, like at a global scale, and also the solidarity in the form of the development assistance. If we are talking about India, that is by the central government and the state governments, probably, which can help us to tackle the pandemic better. Since the pandemic has started probably in the last 1 year plus, we had almost 3 sessions of these master classes where we predominantly focused on understanding the nature of health inequalities, causative organisms, origins of the disease, the general IPC measures or tweaking them, the biosafety issues, occupational safety for healthcare workers, need for enhancement of healthcare infrastructure, including changing some of the infrastructural things within the hospitals where we work. So all these probably, which were part of those sessions which were delivered by very eminent experts, I'm sure, to some extent, that sessions would have helped us to get some kind of insights into the pandemic situation. But even today, after going through the roller coaster, we are still uncertain about the nature of the disease and how to break probably the transmission chain. The lockdowns, curfews, micro containments are still being order of the day. We all know that unlocking is a must, but we don't know how to do it. That is still a big question. The vaccination, which is considered to be our best shot, is still work in progress. Of course, government is working to tweak the policy to contain and undo the damage from the past decisions. Of course, at the same time, it is not that we want to blame anybody, or we want to hold actually the government alone responsible for the situation. But at the same time, we need to understand that there had been flip-flops in the policy making, which has adversely impacted the evolution of the pandemic. Of course, while we are actually pointing the finger at the government and administration, we are, as citizens, are equally responsible for the large second wave, which is yet to end. Considering the fact that even after 18 months into pandemic, new variants, new manifestations of the disease, new waves, etc., etc. This is all making us still clueless. We still have no definitive answers to questions like why second wave is more severe than first, why higher burden of secondary infections, especially of fungal origin in this wave, were predominant, despite emerging evidence against controversial therapies, antibiotics, and other paraphernalia. Why is that we still have in our treatment protocols all those things which were unnecessary? It is also not understood well. Why we are confused about which vaccines, what interval, which priority groups to be covered, etc., etc. And we are not yet clear also on whether we will have a third wave and more waves to come. If they are going to come, when they probably can come, and what we had to expect and how we had to act in order to ensure that we are going to deal with them effectively. So these are all the questions we had in our mind when we designed this series along with Dr. Ranganathan Iyer, where we have seeded this session to answer all those questions, which I have talked about. I am hopeful that this new series, which is called as Masterclass 4 series, shall attempt to answer some of these pertinent questions and unravel some of the mysteries of past waves. I am sure those answers, which are going to come from very eminent people, eminent faculty, eminent teachers, and generally very eminent experts, their answers, their views, I'm sure, are going to help us make some good assumptions and also probably some recommendations for better handling of the waves which had to come. So with these few words as an introduction to the series 4, now I would like to request Professor GVS Murthy, who is my guru and also a well-wisher, and who is a big support for all the work which is being done in the public health area, especially as far as Infection Control Academy is concerned. He had been the big backbone and the support to create the capacity of infection preventionists. To talk about him, probably it will take an hour just to narrate all his positions and also all his kind of work which has been done during last 35 years. But since I was asked to have this privilege of introducing, let me give a very brief introduction to him. Professor GVS Murthy is currently the Vice President, Public Health Foundation of India, and he is also the Director for Indian Institute of Public Health, which is based out of Hyderabad. Over the last 35 years, he has extensively contributed to research, policy formulation, and program implementation in epidemiology, public health eye care, and public health disability. He keeps talking very extensively to various forums, he also is a professor at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, London. So I think with that very brief introduction to Professor G.V.S. Murthy, without further wasting time with my talk, I would like to request Professor Murthy Garu to take over the session. Sir, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Rangareddy. All these Garos and Garas, you can please leave it out. It's not required. I would request Pranav ji to help me with the slides because I'm having problems. So I will be asking you to shift the slides whenever required. So let's start. Let's begin right away, Pranav ji. Can I have the next slide, please? Right. So let me begin by saying that our most favorite game as children, Kabaddi, is what all of us are playing with COVID, or rather COVID is playing with us. It looks after the entire one half of the court and all of the others are on the other side. The unique feature here is that you can't touch it. So in Kabaddi, you have to touch somebody to get the point. But in this unique Kabaddi, you can't touch anybody. And at the same time, you also have to be careful that when the coronavirus is breathing Kabaddi, Kabaddi, you don't come in its vicinity. So a very unique thing that we are all faced with. We have people who've called it the end game in February. Unfortunately, it perhaps is just the beginning, and we have been too fast to rush into a judgmental perspective on where we are with relation to COVID. In the presentation, I'll first look at some of the data in relation to the current status in the country. Then I would touch upon some evidence in relation to measures that could be and have been fruitful in the past. And then ultimately in the last section, I'll share some of my thoughts on the way we go forward. In sharing my thoughts, obviously, there is a lot of learning and knowledge which the others have contributed to, and which I would very much like to present as my thoughts on their learnings. Can I have the next slide, Pranavji? So in presenting this, I would like to look at three different phases. And these phases are basically empirical in the sense that it's no hard and fast rule, but looking at the way the case progression has occurred, we could look at what we could call the first tidal wave, which was the 21st of March onwards, led on to the lockdown from the 24th of March, going right up to about the 29th of November. After that, we saw a plateau, which was from the 30th of November to about the 28th of February. And I'd like to call this the lull before the storm. And normally we try to look at doing something during the lull phase. But unfortunately, we did not seem to learn from our experience or from the experience of the other countries in the past. And the second wave which hit us is more like a tsunami in terms of its intensity, the speed of transmission, and therefore I'd like to label that as a tsunami rather than the next wave. What the future waves would have us look at the moment, we can't say for sure. Next slide, Pranavji. Can I have the next slide, Pranavji? So let me begin with using some of the data that is reported and in public domain. I will not be able to answer questions on is this a reality or is this an understatement, because I don't know, you don't know, we don't know. What we know is from what is reported. So let us try and make sense of what is reported. If I look at this graph, which is looking at the total reported cases, and like I distributed the entire evolution into three categories: the first wave, the plateau phase, and now the second wave. If you look at what has happened, we from about 94 million, 9.4 million cases, went down to about 1.7 million in the plateau phase, and then increased to 1.7 million cases, 17 million cases now. If you look at comparing between the first and the second wave, you see an 82% increase in the absolute number of reported cases compared to the first wave. And this is significant in terms of the propulsion which we see in terms of transmission. Next slide, please. When you look at the mortality, a lot of people have thought that this is a wave which has led to much more mortality. But the reality in terms of whatever data is available does not bear that out as much as it is in relation to the transmission or new infections. From about 137,000 cases or deaths in the first wave, we now have about 177,000, which is an increase of about 30% compared to the 80% increase in terms of the infections that I showed in the earlier slide. What we also have seen is that if you look at the case fatality rate, that is the number of deaths upon the number of reported cases, we've actually declined from about 1.43% way back in the first wave to about 1.03% now. So it is a bad situation, but the situation in terms of infections is far worse when compared to the deaths. Next slide, please. Let me also look at the third aspect, which is very critical, and that is the trends in relation to the testing that we have seen in the country. So if you look at the first wave, we had about 1403, that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So about 140 million tests being done in the first wave, as against just 134 million tests being done in the second wave. Remember, we are finding more infections, but the testing has actually decreased. And the decrease is about 6% between the first and the second waves. When we look at planning, the plateau period, we look at reinforcing the mechanisms that we need to deal with a pandemic. Unfortunately, we have not learned that lesson of the importance of testing in our country. Next slide. So I'll try and put this in relation to a denominator, and that is per million population. And if I look at tests from about 100,000 per million population in the first wave, we are now down to about 95,000 per million population. And that is not something which is good. If you look at the infections, then from about 6,700 in the first wave to about 12,000 now in the second wave in terms of the infections or cases. You look at the deaths, the third line here in the graphic, the deaths have increased, but have not increased as dramatically as the cases, as I mentioned earlier. But when we look at planning, because of the huge numbers of population in our country, we need to use a denominator. Next slide. So let's look at what is reported, and this is from the Worldometer. And there are two things that we need to appreciate when we look at this graphic. One, of course, the steepness of the hills. It is more like the Deccan Plateau or the Vindhyachal ranges in the first wave compared to the Himalayan ranges in the second wave. That is one. But the more important thing is look at the breadth. The duration in which the cases appeared in the first wave the pyramid was much larger. The base was much larger. And when we look at the second wave, the base is much narrower. So there is a steep increase in the case load that we see when we look at the second wave compared to the first. And this is significant because what we try and do is to, when you're looking at flattening the curve, you're looking at trying to see that the Himalayas become more like the Vindhyachal ranges rather than remain as the Himalayan peaks. Next slide. In relation to mortality, there is again the same thing that we see in relation to the case load. Again, a broad base distributed right across compared to the second wave where there is a sharp, steep rise. And this perhaps is the reason why many of us have been very worried about the mortality, because it is a sudden, steep rise compared to the earlier period when we heard about deaths, but they were spread out over a much longer period of time. Next slide, Pranavji. So what do we do? What is the sort of evidence that is available? We know that the situation could have been better. There were things that we could have done. So what is it that we could think of going forward? And obviously there are only two fronts when you look at breaking the transmission. One is responsible habits, which everybody is responsible for. All of us contribute to that category. And the second thing is vaccination. Keeping in mind the fact that the end point in the earlier vaccine trials were mortality and severity and not transmission. Despite that, we find that there is evidence that transmission has been impacted with vaccination. So let's try and look at how we can use the evidence which has been generated in the past year. Next slide, Pranavji. So let me look at some of these things. One is the evidence on the strategies for COVID-19. And one of the best ways to look at it is a systematic review. And this is a systematic review that I'm referring to of 22 studies. Only 9 were observational. And as you all are well aware, excepting for vaccines and for drugs, there are no randomized controlled trials for the rest of the COVID-19 experimental algorithms right now. But 13 were basically looking at models, and they looked at the benefit of contact tracing, screening, quarantine procedures, and isolation of positive cases. When we look at that data, what comes out is that models indicate that if you quarantine at the beginning, and quarantining is when people who have come in contact or have likely contact in an area where there is high transmission or where there is an exposure to an infected case. So quarantining or separating these individuals has a very high rate of success, between 44 to 81% based on studies done in different parts of the world. But if you only look at some components like that of say screening or isolation of positive cases, and where the coverage is low rather than high coverage, then more than 75% of asymptomatic cases may be missed, and therefore they reduce the effectiveness of the measures that can be put in place. So the only way forward that you find from this systematic review is early initiation of quarantine along with large-scale screening with high coverage that includes testing, strong contact tracing systems, and isolation of cases, all together in tandem will be effective in controlling or combating the pandemic. Next slide. And if you look at the evidence that is available, this is one of the classic graphics. You have a healthy group and you have a sick group. The distance and the way that you're exposed to make a lot of difference. So if you are not using any protection, both for the person who's infected as well the person who's coming in contact, then in close contact, very high transmission is possible. And this is what we look at when we look at household clustering. If one person, that is the person you come in contact with, is protecting himself or herself, there is a better chance that you may not get infected. You increase the distance and the person who's infected is wearing a mask, it is more effective. If both are wearing masks, it's low. And if you're 6 feet apart and both are using a mask, taking preventive measures, looking at protection proactively, then you can actually break the transmission cycle. And this is something which is very, very critical, which is common sense, but in terms of the pandemic, many of us remain common without the sense. Next slide, please. There have been studies also looking at what have been the benefits of the lockdown, which is a restrictive measure. And there have been reports showing that there was an 8% in incidence per day, that is a daily incidence during the first lockdown because of the restricted mobility. Even after the unlocking process started, there was an additional 3% reduction in the initial phases after the lockdown was rescinded because people still were a bit careful. So if you put that together, the lockdown on the initial phases of the unlock phase, then about 11% per day was the sort of gain that we had. And these results were corresponding with reduced mobility, which was captured by Google Mobility Trends, showing the social contacts that people had. And that was a very good corroborative piece of evidence. So what was found then and what is important even today is a rapid change in community behavior is critical if you want to succeed. Next slide, please. Pranavji, next slide, please. A recent case series from Mumbai, and I would like to just look at, we all know about the importance of the elderly, hypertension, diabetes, etc. But look at the last statement here, that quarantined individuals showed significant protection against infection compared to non-quarantined individuals. This is live data from AMCHA Mumbai, and therefore it is not a model, it is something that is facing us or staring us in our face, and therefore this particular study is important. It's a large case series, 18,600 individuals. Next slide, please. This is another landmark study that I'm referring to, done in Denmark. It's a small country with about 5.8 million population. But what is significant is that out of that, nearly 70%, that is 4 million individuals, underwent 10.6 million tests between March and December 2020. And perhaps that is one of the highest sort of proportions across countries. And what they did was to look at people who were tested in the first phase, how many were negative, those who were positive, what happened to them in the second phase. It was not a small number, 525,000 people is a massive number. They found that amongst those who had got infected in the first phase, about 0.65% had a reinfection. It was low, but it was significant. In India, ICMR showed it as 4%, whereas in Denmark, it was 0.65%. But amongst those who were negative in the first surge, in the second time, 3.27% tested positive. So there is a risk of transmission, and many of these people who they saw were people who had mild to asymptomatic infection who got infected again in the second surge. What was very interesting in the study was that the overall protection against a repeat infection was as high as 80% over a period of 9 to 11 months. But if you look at the population above 65 years, the observed protection was less than 50%. So with age, the risk of reinfection increases, and therefore prioritizing the older age population, whether it is for vaccination or for curtailing movement, is very, very critical. What they also saw is that up to about 9 months after they first started the process, there was some level of immunity. And if you look at what the earlier SARS infection showed us, or the MERS infection showed us, that those who were infected had protection for about 2 to 3 years. We don't know yet how it pans out in relation to COVID, but there is a likelihood, looking at the Danish data, that once infected, and if you have had a moderate to a severe infection, the period for which you may be protected against reinfection may be much higher. Next slide. So this is the ICMR study, which is again a good study in terms of the fact that it looked at 700 clusters across India, or 28,900, so 29,000 individuals who have been followed up over 3 cycles between May, June last year, August, September last year, and January of this year. And this is antibody testing of the general population. What you find is that the antibody titers have increased phenomenally 25 times, 25.9% now compared to 0.73%. A large population proportion has got infected, but the wave started late February, early March. So what this tells us is that those proponents of herd immunity were entirely wrong. Even with nearly 26% having antibodies, we did not protect against the next surge. So we need much higher levels of infection, which is going to be brutal in populations and absolutely unethical if we expose them to this sort of way of reaching herd immunity. Next slide, please. So let me go at the vaccine status, and I'm looking at a cutoff of 3rd of June this year. So as per government data, you have about 218 million people who have been vaccinated and 174 million who've received 1 dose. If you look at the population above the age of 18 years, then about 18.4% of the population has received at least 1 dose. And if you look at the population above 45 years, and we assume that 75% of the vaccination was in the population above 45, then this segment of our population seems to have been vaccinated to at least 2 out of 5 individuals with at least 1 dose. And this could explain why we have a shift towards the younger ages in the second surge. But if you look at the 2 doses, we come down to about 4.6%. If you look at what we could call as full immunization, on an annual basis, and above the age of 45, still very low at 11%. You look at the UK and US, fully vaccinated populations are between 50 to 52%, and one dose is 90% plus amongst the 18 plus population. So if we see a drop in UK and the US, vaccination has been a major driver there. People have not followed the restriction norms as effectively as in India when you come to US and UK, where it was vaccination which made the difference. Next slide, please. So how do we prepare for the future waves? This is the reality check. You can't pick and choose. You can't have a guy picking up somebody from a, just like picking a needle out of a haystack, not wearing a mask, when we have opened up to all mass activities, and whether it's religious or political. And therefore, this is a reality check that we must be very well aware of. Next slide. Pranavji, next slide, please. So when does resurgence occur? Looking at whatever evidence that we have. So what happens is when you move to a less susceptible, more susceptible area, from a less susceptible area, there is going to be transmission to those populations. So we therefore see the urban to rural spread, because the rural population had hardly any immunity, and therefore they were susceptible in high numbers. In a state like UP, we see, or Bihar, we see a large transmission across the rural belts. Because of what I showed about the vaccination to about 40% of those above the age of 45 years, so what then happens is the susceptible pool is the younger population, the younger working adults, which is why we see now a larger number of younger adults showing infections. We also look at reinfection, which I mentioned. I won't go through that again. Increased unprotected mobility. If we do not look at mobility with restrictions or protection, then we are actually going to ask for a dangerous situation. Mutant strains, and we know that the Delta strain is more transmissible, and data shows that it is 43 to 90% more transmissible. Incubation period can be as low as a day, and therefore the infection risk dramatically increases. The paucity of vaccine supplies, the absence of early detection mechanisms, the complete giving up of contact tracing in many states, and testing, like I showed, coming down so drastically. Perhaps the biggest thing and the learning is the laxity in tackling the virus diffusion during that plateau phase. That was the time when we should have made a difference. That was a time when we should have prepared, and that was a time when we did not do things properly. Next slide, Pranavji. So if I look at the WHO description of pandemics, and I'm bringing this up because whether it is a pandemic or a surge in a pandemic, the same things would be applicable. So you have, next, can you just click on that, Pranavji? You have two phases, the interpandemic, which is before the occurrence and after the occurrence. And instead of calling them pandemics, I'll use the term surges here. So you have the first wave, that's the surge. Then you have the period when there is a lowered plateau. That is when we should actually act to prevent the next surge. And this is a continuous process. We need to look at two aspects in this process. Next slide, please. And the two aspects are, one, what we call as risk assessment, and the second, what we call as risk management. So risk assessment looks at the possibility of the occurrence or refueling of the outbreak. And I'm not talking about petrol, which is going beyond the century mark. Tomorrow, Sachin Tendulkar may be embarrassed because this may cross his centuries. But what may happen in the future surges is important. Assessing that risk and then trying to put together activities to manage that risk, putting together a basket of actions so that you could modify or tamper with or reduce that risk. And that also includes increasing the resilience of the community to be able to take things on board, accept the sort of restrictions that people have to be encountering because of managing that risk. And therefore, though we are not yet outside the pandemic, we are within different surges, and therefore preparedness for surges is also important. Next slide. So when you look at preparing, there is a multi-dimensional synergy that we need to look at. Like Dr. Ranga Reddy mentioned in the introduction, livelihoods is as important as the health charter and as important as education. I dread to think of what the children or the young adults, adolescents of today would face in a phase of complete absence of social interaction, which is so important in the education process. We hardly have any social protection measures. Nutrition issues, diet issues, again, are important. So unless we have a multi-dimensional synergy, we would be failing going forward. Next slide, please. This is a busy slide, a cramped slide, but I wanted to just highlight, and you could go through the slide later, that if you look at the health strategies, there are a basket of activities we need to look at. Vaccines is one aspect we need to look at. Drugs, behavior, how do we inculcate positive behavior? Surveillance, testing, contact tracing, which goes together, skilling, and what Dr. Ranga Reddy briefly touched upon in terms of clinical care. All these are important. And for each of these, we need to estimate how much would be required based upon the population and the prevalence of the different stages of the disease. We need to look at how do we make it universal when it comes to vaccine. And I'm very delighted to look at the Prime Minister's, the Honorable Prime Minister's declaration of free vaccine to the states, because universal health care demands universal vaccination as an important ingredient. Drugs, the biggest problem is the lack of standardized treatment protocols. I'll come back to that once again, looking at the needs, where we have gone wrong, and how we can actually make a difference. How do we actually inculcate positive behaviors? And can we look at incentivizing positive behaviors rather than penalizing? So every day you hear 5,000 people challan for not wearing a mask or breaking the lockdown. But do we hear about 25,000 people incentivized because they were following all the COVID protocols? That is a greater motivator. Skilling, surveillance, extremely critical. And if we can't do enough testing, or even if we're able to do testing, fever and acute respiratory infection, syndromic surveillance is very critical. WHO also demands that we have that on board. Clinical care is something I'm going to touch upon again briefly. In addition to the infrastructure, we've heard about the infrastructure, but just creating infrastructure for a short window of time is not the way forward. So we need to look at how we can manage that, and perhaps look at how do we improve the treatment aspects. Next slide, Pranavji. Like I mentioned in the earlier slide, we need to look at inventories. And I'm just taking one example. We need to do the same for various drugs, categories of drugs, etc. But if I look only at the vaccination, if I were to look at our population above the age of 5 years, getting an annual dose, this has to be repeated every year, mind you, it's not a one-time vaccine. So we are looking at 956 million annual doses, about 80 million monthly doses, looking at a wastage of about 10% and a backlog, people who were not vaccinated earlier, that comes down to about 95 million doses per month that we need to have in place if you're looking at one dose at least for population above 5 years. Let me just scroll down to the population above 18 years. And if I look at both doses, what we require per month is 142 million doses. If you look at what has been mentioned again by the government to the Supreme Court, is that by the end of July, about 140 million doses would be available in the country per month. If that happens, then the target that we could reach is perhaps about the population above 18 years getting immunized. And this is assuming that 75% of the eligible population takes the vaccine, because everybody does not take the vaccine. Next slide, Pranavji. So there is a Panchatantra, 5 tattvas, a health mantra for COVID, and you can't get away from this. This is the only way. Train, test, track, treat, and all that with trust and transparency. If I cannot access data transparently on what is happening in a particular state, then I can't help in an epidemiological modeling. Just depending on assumptions is not the way forward. So these 5 T's are critical if we have to make a difference. Next slide, Pranavji. So the overall control perspective, if you look at the country, we know that about 10% of infected individuals are responsible for 80% of new cases. And this is because it is those super spreaders who are actually infecting a large number. We've seen that in marriages happening. We've seen that in religious congregations. And therefore, we have to be careful of those super spreaders and tackling them. Active syndromic surveillance, economic activity has to open up. And therefore, we need to have in place a checklist for every institution, whether it is an educational institution or a service institution, to have a syndromic surveillance before you enter the workplace. Past week's history using a checklist, other things which could be added like a thermal scanner. You cannot keep on going with lockdowns. If I look at the incubation period of 14 days, so for community transmission, 14 days may be enough. But once somebody gets infected, it usually passes on into the household. And if I then look at the next 14 days, that makes it 28 days. And if I look at the next cycle to be on the safer side, it is taking me right up to 3 cycles, which is about 6 weeks. So if you want lockdowns as a measure, transient or temporary, you have to look at 6-week cycles. Anything less than that is just semantic or window dressing. And I don't think we are here to discuss window dressing. But going forward, the mother of all battles is going to be vaccine production and updation on the one hand and vaccine mutation on the other. That is going to be the critical battle, more severe than the Gulf War that we saw, which was called the mother of all battles at that time. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to look at some of these strategies very briefly. One, of course, is international mobility. We have done that, but we have been a bit lax. This time around, we've not had any quarantining at institutional level for individuals who come back into the country. That is taking a big risk. The UK, you have to get into a 10-day hotel quarantine, which is determined by the border agency. You can't decide. And I think we have failed. We've become lax, and that is not going to help us going forward. If new mutants come from other countries, quarantine is the only way we can fight it. Domestic mobility also. For a long time, people from the press were asking me, will cases come from Maharashtra into Telangana? And I said, border areas are going to be critical. And a lot of it would depend upon what sort of border controls you have, checks you have. Unfortunately, that also did not happen. But then looking at, reducing the footfalls at mass gatherings is also one way of restricting mobility. Next slide. Testing is the next box, and we need to go towards development, and we have so many entrepreneurs to come up with home-based testing. A lot of countries have done it. That removes the stigma, removes the waiting, and that can actually give you the indication whether you can mix with the others or not mix with the others. So widespread affordable home-based testing. If that is not possible, there has to be a quick turnaround of results. At the airport, they give you a report in 2 hours if you pay 6,000, and 2 days if you pay 500. So that means it is doable. Why not then it become universal rather than be elitist in its approach? Rural area testing has to be augmented. Contact tracing was given a complete toss this time, and that again is not good. Contact tracing was what helped Kerala in the first phase and also helped them in the second phase. Look at Kerala, infections occurred, but deaths, they were able to keep it very low. Looking at digital applications which can help us in contact tracing being eased is important. Real-time data access is important. And involving all our RWA representatives, etc., in that contact tracing exercise is something which could be cost-effective and more productive. Next slide, Pranavji. Surveillance. Without surveillance, we are going to be deep in the doldrums. And we need to strengthen this. We can at least start with sentinel sites. We've used this for diarrheas. We've used these for respiratory infections. Sentinel surveillance sites can be a good indicator of what is going to come very soon. We need to also set up rapid response teams, immediate containing the outbreak locally, whether you have a mechanism at the ward level or block level, and having a multidisciplinary team, including civil society, who can actually help you with that localized outbreak control. Next slide, please. Clinical care, and here I'm just going to spend 30 seconds extra. I think one of the biggest dangers for the future is what we have failed to do this time. Let's not give evidence-based medicine a toss. Anecdotal medicine is going to increase your risk of secondary infections, whether it is fungal or bacterial. You have to be careful. And one of the ways which the government, the ICMR have to sit down and thrash out, the Indian Medical Association, perhaps the National Medical Council, all together to develop standardized treatment and prescription protocols with penalties for criminal negligence if these are not followed. Hard times need hard decisions, and we don't want too much of our population suffering from the consequences after going through a harrowing time. Periodic audits that these are being followed have to be set up. If the Indian Medical Council can have audit teams, I just don't understand why we can't have it now. Skilling is critical, and massive online programs are essential. We need updating every 2 weeks in a pandemic like this, and that is the essence of how we can improve care. We also need to look at teleconsultation becoming the norm for most of the first consultations, at least for the foreseeable future, supported by mobile medical teams with well-defined catchment areas. I think we need to think out of the box to try and reach out to people. Next slide. Positive behavior, incentivize positive behavior. I think that is going to make a big difference. We could also look at some sort of sanitizer or liquid soap ATM dispensers so that people don't have to buy them, especially in the poorer segments. And Dr. Ranga Reddy's company manufactures a lot of this material. They could all get together and set up these so that the poor populations do not need to buy them, but would have access to them. And that actually acts as a positive motivating factor. Positive case experiences. Mr. Amitabh Bachchan did not come out and say that this was the positive feeling I had. I think it would have made a difference. Mr. Sachin Tendulkar did not come out and talk about his experiences. I think it's time that these individuals also take a responsibility of sharing their experiences to motivate others and reduce stigma. We are in the era of artificial learning, intelligence, machine learning, and social media, and this can play a big role. Social media postings can actually help us to look at, is there a new outbreak going to happen over the next couple of days or week? It'll help us to localize outbreaks. On the AI side, on machine learning, to look at predictive models for, say, mucormycosis and other fungal infections and other infections that may occur, secondary events after treatment, or real-time analysis, which the artificial intelligence can actually help us. I think both for the clinical algorithms as well as for predictions, this is time for us to use these new technologies. Next slide. Centralized resource centers. I think every state has been fighting to have its own ventilators, oxygen plants, etc., etc., etc. Had we invested time to have centralized depots where these could be held, because all states do not have it at the same time. So moving out to state and then transporting things across would be more cost effective and lead to less wastage as we go forward in time. And I think we need to think about carefully, keep all our egos aside and think how this could be done. R&D support, critical. Trump, he did it, even whatever maybe his drawbacks, he did it and got the US vaccine makers on board. I think it's high time we do the same. Next slide. Tracking asymptomatics is again an important aspect because asymptomatics are fueling it, and the proportion of asymptomatics has increased dramatically from less than 5% in the first wave to about 30% now. Some say 80%, but I disbelieve that. So mechanism to track asymptomatics, because that is going to be the key to control. The encouragement of civil society to participate in activities as a partner, not as a beneficiary, I think is again very critical. Next slide, Pranavji. At the bottom of this entire tree, the roots of that tree is the public health engagement. We need to have a strong, viable public health system created in the country to have a public health response. We have a vast army of human resources who've been underutilized up till now in COVID, and strengthening the capacity at the district and sub-district level is critical if we have to look at the future levels. Using the personnel available at that level for contact tracing surveillance, at the same time being careful that routine medical care is not given a shrift, because people are going to die of NCDs, COVID or no COVID, that is going to happen. So you have to take care of them. You can't tell them, look, we are fighting COVID, everything else is at a standstill. That is not acceptable. You need to increasing the funding. So one option could be look at GST revenues being shared, or value-added tax revenue being shared for COVID responses, and vaccination on the lines of universal immunization program is an important public health response. Next slide. Quarantine, like I mentioned, is critical. And I think we'll have to look at these over the next 2 to 3 years. It's not something just for this cycle, for the next 2 to 3 years. On the public health front, you need to establish district and state surveillance units staffed by people who are trained and skilled. State epidemiological and modeling units have to be established. They have to be skilled, and creating an independent public health cadre which has the skills to deal with these challenges that we've been faced with and caught with our pants down is extremely important. Using public health skills in decision making and implementation is very critical, because public health personnel understand the importance of a denominator. Without a denominator, you make mistakes. Now, I'll just look at an example of where people have made a mistake. Next slide. So you have the National Center for Disease Control in India, and this was what was carried on their website, which was picked up by a large number of newspapers. I'm just quoting Mint. I saw it in Times of India too, that COVID-19 majority of cases among younger population, 15 to 44 years, says data from NCDC. This is absolutely wrong. This is somebody who's not trained in public health, has no epidemiological background, because they forgot to look at the denominator. Next slide. If you look at the denominator, in each of these age groups, if you look at what the population is, then you actually arrive at the real picture. And you look at the real picture, it is people above the age of 41, 50 to 60 and above. It is not the young people or the young adults, as was shown in the headline, which was picked up from the NCDC site, because they forgot what I've encircled here, the denominator. And if we do not use the denominator and only use the numerator in planning activities, it will be a disaster which will be of geometric proportions and something which the country should not pay for. So please see that we have a strengthened epidemiological workforce. Look at this happening. Next slide, Pranavji. So just before I end, for those who are in Hyderabad, I'm sure you've seen these refrigerators which were set up 3 years ago, saying that people who want to share food, instead of throwing it away, could put it into this refrigerator, and those who are needy could just open the door and take that pack of food from there. One thing they forgot is somebody who can't buy, have money to purchase food, would not have money to buy fuel to heat that food. So something was wrong in that planning. You set up the refrigerators, and just a week back, I went across the city to try and look at, was even one functioning. I looked at 10 locations, not one was functioning. So the amount that was put into putting up these refrigerators, an excellent, noble idea, was never planned properly. So you must look at sustainable, workable solutions. If you have that refrigerator, during COVID times when people had a difficulty with food, these refrigerators should have been full. Why should somebody be distributing packets when you have these refrigerators? Put it up there. But unfortunately, that planning was not done. So we don't want a legacy like this where solutions are not workable or sustainable. Next slide, please, Pranavji. And I think that is the last slide. Thank you for the honor and the opportunity to speak with you. I've gone about 7 minutes over time. I hope Dr. Rangareddy excuses me for that. And over to you, Dr. Rangareddy, back to you.
Sir, we were just mesmerized and overwhelmed. So even if you have gone for another 1 hour, we would have just been there with open mouth and mesmerized. Thank you, sir. Thank you for, very enlightening and very stimulating kind of lecture. Why I'm saying stimulating is, I think, these are the times knowledge is everywhere. The information is available everywhere. It is the question of, how to interpret it and how do you actually take that information and put it into action. That is more important. I think, that is where probably your talk is going to help stimulate in all of us to think and also come out with workable solutions, the tools in order to improve the situation, in order to come out of the current wave, and also to think of the future waves, which are probably inevitable now, from whatever you said, whatever we hear from various sources, which is inevitable. That means we need to really work hard in order to find the right solutions. I think, you have given enough for us to think about. I think, you have stimulated us enough in order to put our minds probably together in order to find out workable solutions, especially your last but not one slide, which shows actually, how the planning, a proper planning with a proper objective is going to help the efforts bearing the right fruit. If you are going to just put a refrigerator without a proper thought, it is not going to yield any result, and it is going to be waste of effort and also the resources. And especially in a country like ours, where resources are scarce and constrained, we definitely need to use every cent available, every hour available, in order to get the maximum productivity. I think that is my take from your session, sir. Thank you very much. It's really, really wonderful. And definitely, before actually, I go on with at least some of the questions which audience has been asking, I would like to request your view, sir. Now, you have talked about this second wave, from the multiple dimensions, crunching that data and showing us, what are these peaks and what are these surges and all that stuff. Do you think, a straight layman question, do you think we are out of woods with the second wave, or we are still in there? We are just, up and down with the surges. What's your call, sir?
Yeah, so if you look at one of the graphics where you looked at the broad pyramid of the first surge and the narrow pyramid of the second surge, it's the rapidity with which the cases have come, which is appearing as if today the second surge is going off. The reality is we're still on the tapering limb, and that tapering limb is still going to take some time. And if you look at what is happening in the UK, 2 months they were excellent, and the last 3 to 4 days they've suddenly seen cases come up again. And therefore, I would say that we are not still out of the woods. We are perhaps seeing the sunlight through the branches of the forest. You can see the light percolating through, but there is still a lot of time. I would say that we have to be careful over the next 6 to 8 weeks before we can say that we are into the next plateau, which we should use effectively for planning.
Thank you, sir. I have more questions. Probably I will take at a little later the opportunity to shoot those questions. But for now, probably let me take questions from the audience. Dr. Dilip Kumar Mishra is asking how to calculate the inter-surge time period during a pandemic. What are the factors which play for this preparedness for upcoming surge as third wave?
Right, so there are 2 things to keep in mind when you're looking at the inter-surge period. It is dependent on 2 factors. One, what is the level of infection to which you're exposed? So if the populations, if you look at what happened in February this year, by February, there was already a significant proportion of the population. Studies in Karnataka showed, Tamil Nadu showed in October that about 25-26% of the population already had got infected. So the risk of the others getting infected started coming down. But the only way to say that we are at the end of the surge would be somewhere around 50% of the population showing antibodies, whether it is vaccine related or infection related. So that's the second point. Earlier in phase 1, it was all infection related. Now we have the opportunity of infection plus vaccine together. The minute we are coming towards the 50 to 60, half a century mark, you can say that we are more towards the plateau, and we are going to get time of 3 to 4 months before the next surge may occur. And this is unlike what is seen in the West. If you look at the high income countries, the first surge was the most dramatic, and the second surge was muted. Where we see in our country, the first surge in that sense was muted, the second surge was dramatic. So what happened there was, because there is a lot of overcrowding, closed communities, unlike India where 70% of the population is rural, where you still have open spaces available. So the sort of overcrowding that you see in Europe is what fueled a huge proportion of the population getting mild infections to moderate infections, not perhaps too many severe in the second phase, unlike us, where because of the lockdown coming very quickly early on, a lot of the people who would be susceptible were shuttered off or prisoned off. And the minute they came out with no immunity, initial couple of months, they still were careful, but then they started having more social contacts. That started worsening the thing. There is one study for Dr. Dileep's information, which is absolutely fascinating. The number of social contacts you have determines the speed of transmission. So if you're able to reduce your social contacts to 1 or 2, even during the surge periods, you're still not going to be creating too much of a havoc. But people who have an average of 7 to 10 social contacts, I'm talking a day, 7 to 10 contacts a day, they're the ones who actually fuel the pandemic. And if you look back, that's what suddenly happened. Initially, we were skeptical. Dr. Ranga Reddy would meet me, maybe we just met once in the last 1 year. But people started throwing caution to the winds. That is when the surge occurs. There is no mathematical calculation. You will just need to look at a week to a month's data to compare. Is it on the descending limb, plateauing limb, or on the ascending limb? And that's when you can put your barriers for the surges.
Thank you, sir. Probably one last question probably we would take, that is from Dr. Sanjay Kumar Voja. I am keen to understand that what are those infection prevention interventions beside hand hygiene which can be put to use in helping our healthcare ecosystem in keeping the incidences at low levels and reducing the transmission? It's a very general question, probably.
Again, a fascinating question. And for everybody, this is something of a revelation that in the second surge, the proportion of doctors who got infected, it was much lower than the first surge. So there was something being done right, whether you're protecting yourselves, using your PPEs more effectively, being conscious of when you're taking off your PPE, what you're doing, keeping yourselves at a distance. So there are measures, and these are very simple. It is just like salt and water being mixed together as something which you would have with a bit of a tinge of lemonade in the summers to fight the dehydration. This is grandmother's recipe, but it works even today. The same thing, you don't need sophistication. Simple infection control measures, which we've known for generations, are equally effective. When you go to another's house, Don't go too close to talk to them. Try not to go to their house as possible. Keep your distance at the hospitals or work desks. Use your whatever covering, whatever mask you want to use so that you don't infect the others or get infected from the others. And repeated hand washing. I don't think you need any rocket science solution for simple activities, and all of them work. Over the last 1 year, in addition to the evidence on flu over the past 25 years, these are the measures which work, and we have to persist with them. And we have to reiterate these every day within the house and in the hospital or health setup that you're working in. That would be what I would say. Our big advantage today is the vaccine is also showing that it can reduce transmission. So that's the next layer. So you have two layers. And despite that, if you have a surge, then I think you should not be covered under the Arogyasri insurance scheme, because you are the one who's deliberately allowing it to happen.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. I am really greedy, to let you go without asking one last question from my side. Sir, you have talked about, a 6-month window, which is definitely required in order to probably break the chain or, control the transmission, right? So keeping that in mind, whatever is happening currently with micro containment, nighttime curfews, and limited lockdowns, etc., etc., how effective they are? Are they going to really yield something for us, or it is just a hogwash, eyewash? What is that? What is your take, sir, on that?
Right. So again, here, Dr. Rangareddy, there are two aspects we have to keep in mind. The reason why we have restrictions on mobility, whether through night curfews or through a lockdown, is to see that we are not overwhelmed by infections. That is the main thing. And secondly, to use that period to be able to build infrastructure to tackle any slow release that may occur or sustained release of cases that we may be faced with. If we look at that limited objective, yes, when you keep everybody inside, then obviously you're not going to be able to catch infection from outside. But household transmission would continue to occur. Household transmission, if you're giving it normally one cycle is what happens, but taking an opportunity when you have restricted mobility, one more incubation period, that makes it 6 weeks. If for 6 weeks you have restricted mobility, beyond that, you're not going to get any quantum benefit. So anything beyond a 6-week duration is not going to yield any additional benefits. At the same time, look at the advantage of a country like India. I know there are people from Nigeria also listening in, and this is something that we have to keep in mind. We recently had a study on vaccine hesitancy and on people's two different studies. One was vaccine hesitancy, and the other was how people perceived measures across 11 countries, measures that the government took. So when we look at vaccine hesitancy, the highest vaccine hesitancy was in Europe. France, 60% refused to take the vaccine. They didn't trust it. UK, 30% don't trust the vaccine. US, 40% don't trust the vaccine. When we looked at data from India, Nigeria, 80% trusted the vaccine. So you're starting with an advantage that there is belief. People trust in you, into the product that is there. So hesitancy is less. We should be able to make a difference. Second thing was 11 countries which were studied. They looked at what happens to the instructions given in terms of how restrictive are these and how amenable are these restrictions to people acceptance. In India, 80% are happy to go by the restrictions which were placed in front of them, which means that if 80% of the population is willing to do that because there is an apprehension, we should be able to translate that into 80% believing that if there is no lockdown, they can keep a distance, they can keep themselves safe and not get into unhealthy behaviors. It's all dependent on how we partner with the communities, how we explain to them and get them on board. Unfortunately, everything is a one-way street. I give the vaccine, you take it. I tell you there's a bed, you go there. I give you this medicine, you get mucormycosis. I give you medicine for mucormycosis, take that. That is not sustainable, sir. If you're able to get community on board, partner with them, then lockdowns are not required in the sort of stringent mechanism. Yes, you still need, religious functions. Those sort of things have to be. You can't have mass gatherings. Again, partying in the pubs, whether it is Prost or any other pub in Hyderabad or any other place, or in malls where you sit at the central area, the food court. Those are activities which are bringing people together for more than an hour in contact with each other. Those are dangerous. If we keep those aside, we can make a difference even without a lockdown. Sweden showed that. They didn't have a lockdown. They showed to the rest of the world that they had exactly the same pattern as the rest of Europe without a single day's lockdown. So it is doable.
Thank you, sir. Once again, thank you very much. And on behalf of all the participants, and unfortunately, today we could not accommodate all the enthusiasts. We regret that, but we will certainly make arrangements for our next session so that even wider audience can participate. Definitely, you will all going to get the recording, so don't worry about it. Yes, you could not participate live and having actually getting the benefit of directly interacting with Professor GVS Murthy. But, we will see that, next session is going to accommodate every possible enthusiast, who want to participate in the session. That is our promise. And once again, on all your behalf, I would like to applaud Professor GVS Murthy for a wonderful session and wonderful delivery and a lot of insights. And hopefully, we will have again one more opportunity in the last day or the last session where we are going to have interaction. We will again take that opportunity to clarify some of those doubts and also some of those issues, which we encounter in our daily life with infection prevention practice. And with that, we will end the session. And I remind that the second session is going to be about management protocols for COVID-19 patients, newer agents, boon or bane. It is going to be on 15th of June. Don't miss that. Stay tuned and we will be in touch. Thank you. Have a wonderful time. Stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir.